Welcome back to Squawk Box. The anticipated Aramco IPO has brought the goals of Saudi's Vision 2030 back into focus. Joining us right now is Ali Shihabi. He joins us right now for more. He's the founder of the Arabia Foundation, a Washington, D.C.-based think tank focused on the geopolitics of the Middle East. He's just back from Riyadh, and we have so many questions for you about what is going on over there.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming in, both about the Vision 2030 plan and also in part because I think our audience knows Prince Al-Waleed, who we believe is still imprisoned inside the Ritz, if he hasn't been taken elsewhere, where that is all headed and what that all means. So can we start with the corruption piece of all of this, or the anti-corruption piece of all of this, which is to say, are you supportive of MBS's strategy of rounding up all of these folks, including Al-Waleed?
I am, because I think what he had to do was change the mode of behavior. You know, when the king took power 2 years ago, he talked about the need to reduce corruption.
Right.
And the problem is that there's been a way of doing business in Saudi Arabia for the last 50 years. And talk doesn't affect behavioral change by elites. You needed some sort of shock therapy. And what took place was shock therapy. It was a very hard message that the old way of doing business, the country can no longer afford. Right. It's messy, it's disruptive, it has short-term negative implications, but long-term, it's a very positive development.
Can I ask you, though, just on the Al-Waleed piece, I've argued to people, if Al-Waleed was not on the list, this would have this could have been a very important and big signal inside the country, but the Al-Waleed piece made it an international story. It's the reason why we're still talking about it. And the question is how important it was to include him in this, because at the same time, on the other end of it, there are now American investors and European investors who had relationships with Al-Waleed who say, I don't know if I want to invest in this country. I don't know what's going on. And what kind of transparency are we going to have in this process to understand why these people were arrested, why these settlements have taken place at all?
Well, look, you will not know that till the process is over.
Will you know at the end?
I think you will, because the government understands that it has to draw a red line and explain to the markets, domestic and international, that this was a sort of a once-only unique, once-in-a-generational disruptive event that had to take place to affect behavioral change, but that going forward, that cannot happen again. Now, I think as far as Prince Waleed was concerned, he was an extremely high-profile person. Right. He was involved in the old ways of doing business like everybody else was. So I think there was a purpose maybe also in including him because of his high profile, because it sent a message that these top high-profile individuals that were perceived to be immune were no longer immune. So nobody will be immune. So I think in that sense, that was the purpose that was served by that.
But it does mean that no matter what, they're going to have to come forward to the public arena with information that is damning about all of these people, including Al-Waleed, so that it doesn't look like and isn't, in fact, some kind of shakedown.
Well, and I think they will. I think to the extent that they have said that they're going to come out with a very transparent and public explanation of what happened once the process is completed. Now, what you have is a situation where over 90% of the people who've been held in the Ritz have settled, or are settling. A portion will remain, and that portion that remains will be formally indicted, and the charges will be available, and then they will go through a formal legal process.
Do you think this has helped or hurt their ability to get international investors to get behind this?
No, look, it's disruptive.
And for example, this Aramco IPO.
Yeah, Andrew, it's disruptive. But, you know, any dramatic change is disruptive. There's a price, and everybody understands that. So, yes, today the Saudi market and people are nervous and are in a state of shock because this is something that has never happened before.
And what about the MBS, the stories we hear about him buying real estate in France for $350 million and art for $450 million and all of that? I mean, he was very popular internally, still is very popular about this sort of anti-corruption effort, and yet there are these other sort of cracks in the facade.
I mean, he bought expensive assets a couple of years ago before he really became crown prince. His father's one of the richest men in the world. Right. And he could certainly afford it. Optically, in retrospect, it doesn't look great. But the country isn't fighting wealth. They're not going over after people who can afford to buy yachts. And I think a second message that's being sent to the system.
Yeah, but it looks like you're taking these ill-gotten gains, supposed ill-gotten gains, and turning around and plowing
No,
into your
because you
own.
see, there were different ways that people made wealth in Saudi Arabia. You either made wealth, the king has a capacity to give patronage, right? And the king has a budget where he allocates real estate and he allocates
it's
money
okay for the king, but not
to
for
people.
princes.
Well, no, the king gives it out to people in an organized fashion. I think the issue, the third element of it, was that people were going to make money out of government contracts by cooking those contracts to be equal to 2 or 3 times their real value and creaming that off. And that is the part that the government wants to stop. In other words,
the type of corruption.
your capacity, that's corruption. In other words, when the king gives you legally, and he has the full right to do that, that's patronage. So there's a big difference, you see.
To a Western era, it sounds very similar.
Sorry?
To a Western era, it sounds very similar.
Well, because the Western era doesn't have that sort of system. But ultimately, legally, the king has the right to give you patronage, but you don't have the right to go and cook a contract with the Ministry of Defense for something that costs 100 million and make it 300 million. You see?
Okay.
That's the difference.
Thank you. Appreciate it.